My name's Sarah. I'm one of the reporters here at the Enterprise, and I'm here today with Dr. April Megginson. And we invited April on to come and do a segment with us shortly after the tragic crash in East Bridgewater that killed 4 Stoughton High School students and injured a 5th. In the days following the crash, the Stoughton community, as well as other communities, really came together to show their support for everyone. They hung banners that said Stoughton Strong, they placed orange and black bows all over town, and they even raised more than $50,000 for the families. However, hundreds of people and students were left grieving over the loss of their peers. And a tragedy like this, although has struck Stoughton, has struck many communities in the area before. So, we wanted to invite April on, who is an expert in grieving and counseling. She is the assistant professor of counselor education at BSU. She's a licensed school counselor, and she's a school counseling program director at BSU. So, April is going to answer some of your questions. So if you have any questions about grieving or counseling or how to help your child who is grieving, go to the comments section, type in your question, and we will relay it to April. So, April, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes you an expert in this field?
Thank you for having me here. My name is April Megginson. I have been a school counselor for 9 years. As a school counselor, it is my role to help students kind of who have barriers, right? So the students who have some academic challenges, who are looking at college and career goals, but also the social emotional part, which is what kind of gets me to this part of my expertise. So I've worked with students and kids in all sorts of capacities, with divorce, loss of a parent, even just as simple as kind of choosing a college, transitioning to move away from their family. So I've had a lot of different experience, kindergarten through 12th grade, and now I am a professor at Bridgewater State University, and I work with school counselors and mental health counselors as they grow into their work and graduate and go out into the field.
Perfect. Well, just to kick this off, can you tell us a little bit about grieving and the process?
So Kubler-Ross has come up with this 5 stages of grieving, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. It's kind of weird. Some people kind of push back against stages because it sounds like, oh, you'll go through denial first and then you'll immediately go into this stage. And really what Kubler-Ross was doing was these are the different terrains of what grief looks like. And it may be cyclical, it may be, or it may be you're feeling all of these in one day. Okay. But there's a lot of research and support out there for this model and for the different types of things that will be going on for somebody who is experiencing grief or loss.
And what are some of those types of things that a kid might go through during the grief?
So kids will go through the same thing. Depending on their developmental level, it'll look a little bit differently. So if we're talking about 6, 7, and 8-year-old kid, developmentally they're very literal, right? So they can't really understand abstract ideas such as death. So it's really important with little kids like that you're going to talk about this person died and use those terms that we're a little afraid to use because they're lost, they passed away. Kids don't understand what that means, and it's really difficult for them to kind of understand that concept. Additionally, they're kind of still in this magical, wishful phase, so they might think that if they wish hard enough, if they're good enough, that this person might come back. And so it's going to be really important as a parent to kind of, I don't want to say shut that down, but you're going to want to confront that and have that conversation of, sometimes I just wish they would come back, but the truth is they're not going to. And that's not how death works. And so that's really important. When you move into adolescence are trying to be more independent. They're very much part of their social network and their social group. So they'll be looking for social support with their friends. So that'll be really important to kind of help with that. But a lot of times they don't have the skills to deal with grief, especially when you're talking about the loss of a friend. Many teens kind of feel that invincibility, like nothing could ever happen to them. Mm-hmm. Their life is so long that it stretches out so far, in front of them.
Right.
It's really hard for them to think about death for themselves.
Right.
And so that becomes even more difficult because they might not be as open to communicating with parents as the younger kids would be.
So I know for this tragedy, obviously 4 students were killed, and the media really came to the town right away, and it was a big deal. It was something that the town really couldn't ignore. So I could only imagine that young kids did hear about the death. How would you address death or grieving with a child that is 8 years old versus a child that is 18 years old?
So with an 8-year-old, I would probably look at books, right? Because parents talk and we're kind of like the Charlie Brown, want, but if it comes from a book, like it has so much more magic and meaning for, and I can't recommend a book, but librarians are out there to help you. There's a website, the National Alliance for Grieving Children, that has some lists of books that might be appropriate for you. And so as a parent, I would definitely be getting a book and reading that book to my child and talking about it and talking about what's going on and the feelings that are evoked and helping them name those feelings. Because that's hard for a kid to understand their own emotions. And so as a parent, it's going to be really important for you to role model your own emotions and say, you know what, I'm feeling really sad today because all I can think of is grandpa or this person. And so, being able to role model that. Of course, we want to shelter our kids and keep them safe, but being a good role model is probably the best thing that we can offer for them. As far as the 18-year-old, they're going to be a little bit, obviously, more like adults. So we're looking at, there's going to be a lot of guilt, and maybe even they might start analyzing their life. Like, is this really where I want to be? Is this the kind of person I want to be?
Right.
And to be really thinking about, and maybe that can change for the positive, right? So somebody looks at themselves and says, gosh, I'm not as nice to other kids as I really wish I could be. And that might help them kind of develop and form their identity a little bit more. And as a parent, it's just going to be important in both areas to be honest, to be making sure that you're modeling your own grief or talking about an experience that you had, maybe when a friend of yours died. Really being open and honest with your kid as much as you can is going to be the most important thing. Giving them expressive ways to talk about grief. Obviously, the younger they are, the more communication is really not their thing. Play is their thing.
Right.
So you might see a kid who might be playing with cars and crashing them or doing things because they're trying to process that in their brain. And that's a perfectly normal thing for them to be doing. They might need to draw or talk about, not talk, but their communication is through play.
Right.
And so you might have to play with them and help them to understand that not all cars crash, or whatever the case may be, however they're working it out in their brain.
Right. So with that being said, what are some warning signs that you should look out for that maybe your child is not doing well?
So definitely, if your kid is withdrawing, if you see a dramatic personality change, I mean, as a parent, you're the expert in your kid, so you know kind of what's normal for them. But if you see that kind of dramatic switch or dramatic change, you need to reach out for help.
Right.
And there's a ton of people who are willing and able to help. School counselors, school adjustment counselors, working with your religious leader, if because death ties into religion, right? So whatever your religious beliefs might be, tapping into those as well.
Right.
And kind of talking about that. But definitely isolating, not talking to friends as much, like that severe, like that depression, those depression symptoms, those are going to be what you're going to look out for. Talking about death a lot, you want to be concerned. I mean, as a parent, you're going to be concerned, but there's a lot of different ways to reach out for help,
right.
To help your kid.
If your child is one that is quiet or doesn't really communicate about it, but you know they're struggling, what is some ways that you can communicate with them, or should you just let them be and deal with it on their own?
So this is kind of one of those, it depends on the kid, it depends on the situation. But I definitely think, making the effort to be around, you don't necessarily have to bring it up all the time, but just being available and maybe even talking more about the TV that you're watching. Oh gosh, look at that. That's kind of similar to what happened here, or gosh, I wonder what would happen. It's just kind of taking the moments that we share and bringing it back and tying it back and asking, how are you doing? What can I do to help?
Right. And again, I know it depends on the child, but what is something you should do right away after you get that news that someone they knew has passed?
Gosh, with today's technology, you're going to want to make sure to reach out quickly, because your kid might know before you even know, because they tell each other. I mean, things spread fast, before it would be, and I mean, with social media, it's hard to keep things contained. So you want to make sure that, especially if you're the parent, you want to try to make contact as soon as possible with your child, and try to be the one to tell them in person. But sometimes that becomes difficult because they already know. Does that make sense? It's hard. Yeah.
And I know with social media, they do know so fast. Is there, actually, something I really do want to know is, what should schools do? I know you're talking about what parents should do,
right?
But obviously, once a child goes to school, they're still going to struggle. So what?
Right. So schools should be. I think from what I understand of what happened with this tragedy, the high school pulled together counselors that were available for the students to talk if needed. That's perfect. That's exactly what you want to see happening. A lot of times, usually what will happen is there'll be a place in school that's kind of a safe place, or it might become a memorial of sorts where students can go and talk about their loss and their grief. And what's weird, and what I think is weird, and what I've seen happen at the school level, is sometimes students who are not friends, had maybe didn't even really know that person, somehow it taps into something for them,
right?
And it becomes a trigger, maybe for other losses that they felt, or something that's going on within themselves, or it becomes scary. So it's interesting, because a lot of times you'll see students who didn't even know the students that had died will come together and need support. So doing that, but in the aftermath, you're going to want to keep track of it. As a school, you're going to want to keep track of the students that were pretty close friends with, or that other car that was behind. So those students that were kind of there, obviously they saw something pretty traumatic. So those students would be kind of on my radar if I were the school counselor. But also, as teachers, hopefully, this is a perfect way for English teachers to kind of tap in and let kids express themselves, and give them an outlet or a platform for them to talk about what's going on for them, even if it's in a written paper that nobody else reads but the teacher. So important. There's so many different things that can happen at the schools. I think you had talked about therapy dogs.
Yes.
Of course, wonderful. So, we'd love to see different ways for counseling and ways for students to feel better, to be integrated into the school setting.
Perfect. And we do have a question. It's from Amy in Stoughton. She's wondering, will the pain her child feels losing a classmate ever go away? Or do you just have to find ways to grieve and mask the pain?
Okay, so does the pain ever go away? I don't think so. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear. But it will lessen, and it will change into something different, and it will hopefully change into a remembrance that this young person has of their friend. Masking, I don't like that word. I don't know, I don't think we need to mask our grief. I think we need to say, I'm grieving. Life stinks right now. I'm sad, or I'm hurting, I'm in pain. This really sucks. I don't know if I can say that. But it does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what's happening. And I think the more, Amy, that you can get your daughter, right? Child. Sorry. Amy, that you can get your child to express their feelings and to find a way to memorialize the relationship, whether that's writing letters or developing something creative. I don't know, I was going to say, some people get tattoos to memorialize things. I don't want to suggest for people to rush out and get tattoos. But, you have to find your way of memorializing that relationship that you had in that person. And so, as a parent, you can start kind of maybe brainstorming some ways for your child to do that. And that's going to be what starts to lessen the grief.
Do you have any ways that a child could do that? I know I've heard of students writing letters for their classmates that have passed, or painting a picture that reminds them of that person.
Exactly. Or, everybody has their own expertise or their own way. So maybe listening to music, creating I'm dating myself, a mixtape, but creating some kind of, it's the creation of something. So,
right.
So whatever that looks like for that kid, whatever that kid's good at. So it could be writing letters.
Mm-hmm.
It could be writing a song. It
right.
could be developing a playlist. It really could be anything
right.
and everything. It could be writing the person's name down on a rock and painting that rock and keeping it close to them. I mean, there's just so many different things, and I'm sure you could kind of Google that and come up with some different ideas, but it's going to be specific to that relationship. Right. So there's no one way fits all.
I know a lot of times after a car crash, people will go to the scene in the hours or day following, and they'll create a makeshift memorial. Do you think that's something that helps?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's you want to say something or give something or acknowledge that this person was special in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And if that means bringing a teddy bear to that site, then that's perfect. Everybody has, we might have stages of grief, we might have all these different things, but grief looks different for everyone. Mm-hmm. And there is no right answer. So, and that's the part that kind of stinks about it too, because you want there to be a right answer. You want there to be, okay, this is how I'm going to help my kid, right. And I'm going to hug them, and we're going to do this, and everything's going to be fine.
Right.
But it's a process. You're going to have to just survive it, live through it.
Right. And I know, obviously, right after the crash comes the funerals and everything. Do you think going to the funerals helps a person? Or I know some parents are nervous that it'll trigger something else for their child.
I think so. I think sometimes they tend to be in that stage when we're still in shock and denial, so we're not quite ready to say goodbye. Mm-hmm. We haven't gotten there yet. So I think, we can't really hold them off mm-hmm. or anything until we get to that, until we're ready. Right. But at some point, I think we need to find, that's where that other memorializing comes into, because even at the funeral, I mean, it's important to be able to say goodbye, but again, you know your kid, you know your age, the age that they are developmentally, where are they at. If it's going to be this big mystery for them that they are going to need to solve, then take them. Allow them an exit or an escape route if you need it. But again, you're kind of the expert of your kid, so you're going to know best for your child. If this is going to be appropriate, but a lot of times it is, because it's a formal, it's a ritual. It's part of what makes us human, and so it is kind of an important ritual to attend.
Right. And I should ask, if your child isn't going through the grieving process right, or they're struggling, what is something that can happen to them later on? Can they become depressed? So
if they kind of suppress their feelings, then a lot of times what will happen is those feelings will start to bubble over. So, I think of the analogy of a pot of boiling water. If we put a lid on that pot, then at some point that water is going to start bubbling over, and that's what happens to kids sometimes. And it will be like, well, this person called me stupid, and they punch that person. Well, normally they have skills to deal with that, but that's just what made that, it's like the last straw on the camel's back. It's what kind of made that explode. So that's when you start knowing if your kid's acting out in ways that they normally wouldn't. That there's a little bit more turmoil going on for them, but it's eventually going to catch up to them, those feelings.
As a school counselor, when you were put in these situations where someone was, their parents were going through a divorce, or they lost a friend, and they came to you, were they usually, I know it varies again, but were they usually angry? Were they sad? Were they confused?
Oh, it totally ran the gamut. And again, it could have been, they went from sad and angry and confused within the 30 minutes that we were sitting there talking to one another. That's what I'm there for, is to help them navigate that experience, and somehow they're going to navigate it and then incorporate it into their identity and their personhood, and it's so different. It's just, I can't even. I sat with a young girl once whose mother hadn't shown up to work for 2 days, and she'd been with dad for the past 2 days, and so they were thinking something had happened to mom, and so she sat in my office while the police went through the house, and they did find her. She had died. She had a medical history anyway, and so I was with her through this whole process, and it was horrible. It was horrible to sit there and watch this girl, and we just talked about her mom and things that she loved about her mom, and talking about the person that's passed is so important, and remembering them for the wonderful things and maybe some of the crappy things.
Right.
We're people, we're not perfect, and so kind of remembering, I hated when they did this, or really hurt my feelings, or I love them so much. Our relationships are complicated. They're not just one way. So there's so many different feelings involved when we have a relationship, whether that's a friendship or a romantic relationship with someone, that we're processing all these things all at the same time.
Right.
And so you can see your kids kind of mood swings a little bit, but that's fairly normal.
Right.
It's just if they stay in one mood too long, or if they're going back and forth too much, they just might need additional support.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with needing support.
Right. And I that's something that I think is important to realize, that people don't just grieve after death. They grieve during divorce, or the breakup of a friendship or a relationship. So if they are grieving and maybe parents don't realize that they're grieving, what is something that a parent could look out for? I know you said mood swings, but teenagers can...
Teenagers are pretty moody. Yes. It's difficult because, as a mom of a teenager, I know I'm only allowed to see like one little sliver of their life, and so it does become difficult because it's all about the relationship you've built with them up until that point.
Right.
So how open are you? How communicative are you? Are you able to talk with them? The best thing I can say is follow your gut. Mm-hmm. You'll know, like, when things are not right with your kid, Mm-hmm. And you might have to wait for them to come to you with it. But if you're really worried about your kid, mm-hmm. then you need to seek support. Okay. Trust yourself. Trust your gut. Even if your kid's like, no, I'm fine.
Right.
They might not be fine. Trust yourself. Again, I know I keep saying this, but as a parent, you are so much more knowledgeable of your own child. I might know the grieving process. I might know how to support your child through that. Mm-hmm. But being able to go, oh, yep, this is what's wrong.
Right.
You as a parent have so much more valuable information.
Right.
So an expertise in that.
And I know we've been talking a lot about parents and teachers and adults and how they can help. Mm-hmm. What if you're a friend? What if your friend comes to you to say they're grieving? Should they approach an adult, and what can they do to help?
So I talk to kids a lot about, okay, is this a problem that's too big for you? Mm-hmm. So if your friend's sad and you're wanting to talk about that sadness, okay, that's one thing. Right. And I think that you can be there for your friend and listen. And it's really important, especially teenagers sometimes have a hard time listening because we're listening to respond, right? So we're waiting for our turn to talk. But when we're really listening to a friend, we're just allowing them to speak without feeling like we need to say something back or to share in that experience. Somehow we don't need to talk about our own loss. Right. We can just be there with our friend. And sometimes you can just sit and cry with your friend who's sad. And that could be more support than feel better. Things are going to, sometimes we want our friends to feel better. So we want to say those things like, the pain's not always going to be, those cliche things. Right. So there's that. So there's definitely a level of course you can be a friend to your friend. And the best thing you can do is just listen to them and be there with them. And even if even if they're talking about the breakup between their boyfriend for like the 50th time and you're like, the truth is that's part of grieving, and we need to talk about it. And your brain is processing it. And when you talk about feelings versus feeling them, a different part of your brain is activated. So it's helping you to really process it and kind of and let it flow through you and kind of out of you. Right. But I do think that at some point, if you're concerned about your friend, if they're feeling too sad all the time, that it's definitely important to reach out to your own parent, reach out to the school counselor at your school, a teacher at your school, whatever adult you feel comfortable talking with, your coach. There's tons of people out there, adults that are in kids' lives that are, willing to help. And so you might want to send it out to those big people. So I always kind of tell kids, make sure, like, if this problem is too big for you, then you need to help your friend by seeking adult help.
Perfect. And I just wanted to take a second for those people tuning in. We are here with Dr. April Megginson again, who is an expert in counseling and grieving. And if you guys have any questions for her, to go to the comments section, type in your question, and we will relay it to April. And actually, speaking of which, we have a question from Anne Marie. She said, how do I help my kids that are grieving to ease back into their daily routine? I have a child that's having difficulty getting back to his part-time job. His reasoning is that he found out about his friend's death while at work and is not able to see past
Okay, so this is a tough one, Anne-Marie. So I think that, of course, getting back into routine is so important.
Mm-hmm.
So great job as a parent for kind of knowing that, trying to get back into the normal, because then it's comfortable. It is the expected. And so when something unexpected happens, getting back into that routine can be pretty important, which we haven't talked about, but it is an important thing. So, it sounds like your child is kind of having this almost a PTSD kind of moment of being at work might mean that I'm going to get another bad phone call, or it's going to bring up those feelings. So, there's a couple of different things that you could do. You could walk through that moment with your child. What was that like? Let's imagine it. Let's envision it. Because the more you talk about it, the more it's not bottled up inside, ready to kind of find you when you least expect it. This kid might need some support in going to work, which sounds silly.
Right.
But it's not. Obviously that they've identified this place as with all these negative feelings. So trying to figure out, and hopefully they have a boss who's willing to work with them, but maybe just going there to not work, to just be there, and to remember that there's hopefully fun to be had. I don't know what kind of job this is, but trying to figure out maybe baby steps to get back to work. It might mean that this kid doesn't need to work at this place again. I mean, and not that we need to always shut the door to things, but if it's so traumatic for them that they can't go to work, then maybe we need to reevaluate whether that's where they need to be.
Right.
I don't know monetarily if that's even an option. I mean, I don't want to throw that out there.
Right.
But he's going to need, I think it's a he, but the child's going to need to figure out a different way to think about work.
Okay. And I know Anne-Marie had mentioned the daily routine, and I know a lot of times after a death, students might not go to school the next day. They might be sick for a week. They might just stay inside and stay in bed. What is a daily routine important for this and getting back to your normal self?
Yes, and I definitely think for the younger kids it's more important because they rely on being able to know what's going to happen next. It's always like there's not really a right answer. So again, it's kind of like if your kid needs to stay home and you're going to be able to be there and support them, and it's not them just shutting themselves up in a room, then by all means, they're finding a way to take care of themselves. We all need our mental health days, right? Where we go and do something for our own health. Maybe that means just sitting home and binge watching some TV. I don't know. But at the same time, we need to get them back into the routine.
Right.
And it's hard. I'm sure, like if I were a teacher in one of these classrooms, I probably would have changed the way the classroom is set up, because you're going to always look at that one seat that's empty now. We're not saying that person doesn't exist anymore, but we're also saying we can't stop everything.
Right.
We have to go on living, and that's the harder part of all of this.
Right. And speaking of which, I know after this tragedy, there were 4 empty seats.
Right.
What does a teacher do? Are they supposed to just try and move on and have that daily routine, or do they just say, we're not doing work today, let's just talk?
I mean, I think you need to take the temperature of the room as a teacher, and usually teachers are pretty adept at doing that. And I think that for each teacher, each classroom, it might look a little bit different, but it could definitely mean, you know what, I thought we were going to do this today, but I look out here and I see these 4 empty desks, and I just feel so sad. Mm-hmm. It's important for teachers to model grief too. And to be able to say, let's talk about what do we want to do as a classroom. Do we want to change the way that this class is set up? Do we want to move people's classes or seats around? Do we want to put 4 desks to the side and be able to post pictures and things of that person that we loved? Do we want to write and share our favorite story? I mean, there's so many different ways to express, and I'm hoping, but at the same time, when it's hard because teachers are grieving too, right? So they have to take care of themselves before they can take care of everybody else.
Right.
And as a parent, you have to do the same thing. So even maybe if you didn't know this kid, but it brings up a memory of a friend that you lost, or it brings up loss of any kind. We do have to take care of ourselves first, so that we can give to our kids. And so hopefully teachers are finding that support at their school level or outside, getting some support. But yes, because we're going to have to talk about they're not here anymore.
Right.
And really there's 5 seats missing.
Right.
Or 5 seats empty, and there's probably a lot of feelings that go into that 5th seat.
Right.
And so kids need to talk about it. They need to find ways to talk, process, deal with it. And the only way they can deal with those feelings is by talking or expressing them in some way.
Right. Another question I had was, I know most of these kids were athletes and part of a team, and I mean, most kids are part of a team or a club or something, and so if you're a coach or a club advisor, is it something that you should bring up, and if you do, what should you say? Or is it something where maybe you should feel like this is the normal space, let's just have fun for a couple hours?
Again, it totally depends on the group. It depends on the coach. But I mean, a lot of times they do something symbolically for somebody that they've lost. Although this is 4, not 1.
Right.
So the grief is just even that more exacerbated. The impact is even bigger. The ripples are far. You know what I'm saying? So because everybody, some people might not know one person, but they'll know one of the 4.
Right.
So definitely as a coach, I think it would be so important if you are in an okay space for yourself to talk about it. So how can we help support? How can we, how do we bring the team back together again? If there's any animosity or anger, how do you bridge that? Because these kids might feel anger.
Right.
They might be angry at themselves. They might be angry at other people. So it becomes kind of a juggling act of kind of seeing how everybody's involved, seeing what their take is. So of course, reading the room, reading the group, but obviously they were a team, they were a family. So when one person's missing, 2, 3, 4 people are missing, it's gonna have an impact on that team. So definitely do the routine,
right?
But maybe now you add some other kind of ritual or some kind of part to the routine where we're saying hello, saying goodbye, remembering those that aren't with us.
So I know we've talked about a lot today, but what are the main things that you hope that people take away from this? I think it's so important to be honest with your kids and to be genuine and real and be able to say, hey, I can't concentrate today because all I can keep thinking about is this. Right.
What's going on for you? And just really being honest and allowing kids to be able to express any kind of feeling, because any kind of feeling is appropriate as long as it's the actions, right? So it's totally okay to be angry. Right. It's not okay to punch your sister, right? So being able to acknowledge those feelings and help name them for kids, because a lot of times they don't have the words and the emotional regulations. It's how to regulate your emotion, how to so punching a pillow is okay. Doing helping them find ways. It's okay to be sad. What can we do when we're sad?
Right.
Really just talking to your kids, opening the door, allowing that conversation to happen, even when you're uncomfortable.
Right. And before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to say or add?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. And then I actually have one last question. If people do have any more questions about grieving or what they can do with their children, are there any resources that you suggest?
So the National Alliance for Grieving Children is one website. It has a number of different resources. It also has a link to different agencies in Massachusetts that work with grieving kids. Definitely the school counselor, I'm going to always push that. Going to the school counselor to help find some resources, a school adjustment counselor. And again, your religious leader, whatever religion you might be, they might have some sources or some resources for you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for everyone who asked questions and joined in, and I think that's it for today. All right. Thank you so much again.
You're welcome.